A gate can be closed without being locked. A people can be turned away without being defeated. There are moments in a nation's life when the world mistakes silence for weakness, when restraint is read as retreat, when dignity is confused for disappearance. In the north of the continent, where desert winds meet old stone, a quiet decision was made, not to argue, not to beg, not to perform injury, just to wait, and to build where no one was watching. Across the old Medinas, where walls still hold the desert wind, elders spoke quietly about timing, about knowing when to open one's door and when to guard it. Because in many African traditions, postponement is not weakness, it is strategy wrapped in patience. Yet the world did not hear patience, it heard defiance. And so Morocco was cast outward, not only from a tournament, but from a moment it had prepared to hold. But Africa remembers something modern institutions often forget. Exile is rarely the end of a story. Sometimes it is the beginning of return. Long before stadium lights washed Moroccan cities in electric glow, power in this land was understood through something quieter, baraka, a spiritual inheritance, a transmitted legitimacy, an authority felt, not announced. In older Moroccan thought, leadership was never merely administrative, it was custodial. The ruler was not simply one who governed, but one who preserved balance between land, people, and unseen forces. To host was sacred. Hospitality, across Amazigh, Arab and Saharan traditions, was never transactional. It was moral architecture. A host guarantees safety. A host protects the traveler. A host prepares the ground before inviting witnesses. And so when fear of an invisible illness began traveling across borders, Morocco made a decision that many outside Africa interpreted through a familiar but shallow lens. They assumed hesitation, but inside African knowledge systems, there is an older logic. The wise leader fears the wrong disaster more than the right embarrassment. The contradiction emerged immediately. A country known for openness suddenly chose caution. A nation prepared for celebration chose delay. To external observers, it appeared irrational. Institutions prefer momentum. Calendars demand obedience. Global sport rarely pauses for cultural reasoning. So punishment arrived, swift, procedural, impersonal. Morocco was banned from hosting, stripped of the stage it had built. Yet something subtle unfolded beneath the administrative drama. Because in many African societies, when the drum falls silent, the village does not panic, it listens. Silence is diagnostic. Morocco turned inward, not dramatically, not defensively, deliberately. Airports expanded. Rail lines stretched like arteries between ancient cities and modern ambition. Stadiums rose, not as monuments to pride, but as declarations of readiness deferred. The country was no longer preparing for the tournament it lost. It was preparing for the moment no one yet imagined. Here lies the deeper contradiction, one often missed in contemporary readings of African statecraft. Exclusion can become infrastructure. What appears to be setback becomes rehearsal. Across the continent, elders have long warned against confusing visibility with strength. The baobab does not rush its growth. Yet when storms arrive, it is the tree that remains. Years passed, and gradually, Morocco re-entered continental football, not loudly, but unmistakably. Then came a tournament far from its shores, where Moroccan players carried something heavier than expectation. They carried narrative correction. Each match felt less like competition and more like testimony. That preparation done in quiet eventually demands recognition. When Morocco advanced deeper than many believed possible, something shifted in African psychological space. It was not merely sporting success, it was symbolic restoration, a reminder that Africa does not lack capability, only patience is often misread. But the story does not end with performance on foreign soil, because history occasionally grants nations a second invitation. And when it came, the opportunity to host Africa's grand football gathering, Morocco accepted not with triumphal noise, but with composed inevitability. The host that once stepped back, stepped forward again. Yet the greater revelation was still forming. Soon after, the world itself extended an even larger gesture. Not a continental tournament, a planetary one. The World Cup, shared across continents, yes, but anchored in part on African ground. Pause long enough to see the magnitude. A nation once judged unready, now trusted with global arrival. This is where indigenous insight begins to illuminate what modern commentary often misses. In African cosmology, time is not strictly linear. It spirals. Events return, not as repetition, but as elevation. The opportunity you lose in one season may reappear when you have grown into its weight. Reflects an older African intelligence. Preparation is not proven when you are included. It is proven by what you build after exclusion. Now consider the consequence of misunderstanding such intelligence. For generations, Africa has been narrated as reactive, waiting for validation, waiting for investment, waiting for permission. But Morocco's arc quietly disputes that script. Infrastructure before applause, capacity before recognition, vision before consensus. When a society internalizes long-term thinking, it becomes difficult to destabilize with short-term judgment. And yet the deeper cost lies elsewhere. When Africans forget their own temporal philosophies, patience, cyclical return, strategic restraint, they begin measuring themselves by clocks that were never designed for them. They mistake delay for failure. They abandon preparation for visibility. They perform readiness instead of cultivating it. Morocco chose otherwise. Notice something else, rarely discussed. Geography placed Morocco at a civilizational crossroads for centuries. African, Mediterranean, Atlantic, Arab, Amazigh. Cultures converged there long before globalization gave it vocabulary. To host the world, therefore, is not entirely new. It is an echo. Caravans once arrived bearing salt, gold, manuscripts, memory. Today, aircraft descend carrying athletes, supporters, cameras, and again, witnesses. The form has changed, the role has not. Here, clarity begins to surface. The ban was never the defining chapter. It was the narrowing of the bow before release. What seemed like reputational loss became strategic gestation. What looked like absence became structural presence. And perhaps the most important reframing is this: Africa's ascent will not always announce itself through confrontation. Sometimes it will arrive through competence so undeniable that the world adjusts without debate. Morocco teaches a lesson older than football. Dignity is not reclaimed through argument. It is established through readiness that cannot be ignored. Now the continent watches differently. Because when one African nation successfully hosts and co-hosts the world, it subtly expands the horizon of what is considered normal for all. Normalization is power. Expectation is power. Familiarity with excellence is power. The psychological distance between possible and inevitable shrinks. And perhaps, beneath the tournaments and ceremonies, a quieter restoration unfolds. Africa hosting itself, Africa hosting the world, Africa trusting its own preparation again. But remember, indigenous wisdom never celebrates prematurely. Among many African traditions, the hunter does not boast when the path clears. He listens for the next wind. Because history is generous to societies that prepare, and unforgiving to those that merely perform. Morocco did not rush back to the stage. It widened the stage until the world had room to stand upon it. When a nation learns to turn exclusion into preparation, the question is no longer whether it will host the future, but whether the future has already begun arriving there. If stories like this awaken something deeper in how you see Africa, its memory, its intelligence, its unfolding future, then walk with us. Subscribe to the African Lens Tales,
Where the continent is not explained, it is revealed.